You're listening to Precinct 444, a podcast network from the National Law Enforcement Museum. Today we're bringing you an episode from Lifeline, offering a holistic wellness approach focused on supporting American law enforcement, promoting resilience, safety, and survivability.
All right, good afternoon and welcome everybody. This is our first quarter webinar for 2024, where we are going to take a look at where things are at this time with regard to fatal law enforcement traffic crashes. With me today, as always, is Rio Nelson, a highway safety specialist with the Enforcement and Justice Services Division of NHTSA. Rio is going to bring us up to date on some of the new things going on at NHTSA with some of their new data points. So we'll hear from Rio first, and then he'll toss it back to me, and we'll take a look at the numbers and discuss a few things that we're seeing here at the Memorial Fund as we look at crashes. Rio, welcome.
Thank you, Nick. I appreciate it. Appreciate that. And once again, also, I just want to thank you and the folks over at the National Law Enforcement Memorial Fund for the incredible work that you guys do, and we're forever grateful for your service and the partnership. Well, first, we're going to start off with the latest data facts. In 2023, there was an estimated 40,999 traffic fatalities. It was a decrease from 3.6% from 2022. This decline marks the seventh consecutive quarterly decrease starting from the second quarter of 2022. Additionally, preliminary data from federal highways indicates a 2.1% increase in vehicle miles traveled in 2023. The fatality rate per 100 miles vehicle miles per traveled in 2023 decreased 1.6. That's down from 1.3 in 2022. And the regional offices, 8 out of 10 regions experienced a decrease in fatalities, with the 9 out of the 10 regions seeing a decline in fatality rates of 100 million vehicle miles traveled. And furthermore, 35 states are projected to have had fewer fatalities in 2023. The final fatality counts from 2022 to 2023 will be revised in FARS on the final file of 2022, and annual report for 2023 become available next year. And further data can be seen at crashstats.nhtsa.dot.gov. And make sure that's right. And for our as well as a reminder, our upcoming awareness campaigns, these materials and all NHTSA traffic injury prevention campaigns are housed at NHTSA's traffic safety marketing site. That's tsm.gov. And just a reminder, April is Distracted Driving Awareness Month. Distracted driving has emerged as a perilous epidemic on our roads. Among the array of distractions, cell phone use, particularly texting, talking, and engaging in social media, has emerged as one of the most common uses of distracted driving. And of course, our Click It or Ticket is a national highway visibility enforcement campaign that focuses specifically on the consequences of not wearing seatbelts, while urging riders to always buckle up. The material created for this campaign highlights law enforcement's goal of encouraging drivers and passengers to wear seatbelts to spread awareness about the increased police presence on our nation's roads during this period. The campaign runs from May 22nd to June 4th. Speeding catches up with you. And it's a year-round social norming campaign that focuses on speed prevention. And also next up is the Impaired Driving Social Norming campaign, which aims to emphasize drunk driving prevention throughout the year. Specifically in the month of July, will feature key messages such as: if you feel different, you drive different; you drive sober, get pulled over. And these campaigns will run simultaneously throughout the month of July, reinforcing the importance of responsible driving behavior and promoting public safety on our roads. And forever, NHTSA extends its deepest gratitude to law enforcement agencies for their invaluable assistance in promoting traffic safety across the nation. The dedication and commitment of law enforcement officers play a crucial role in enforcing traffic laws, preventing crashes, and saving lives on the road. NHTSA recognizes and appreciates the tireless efforts of law enforcement personnel in keeping communities safe and ensuring that everyone reaches their destination safely. And that is all I have. My name is Rio Nelson, and from the Enforcement Justice Services Division here at NHTSA. I will turn it back over to Nick. Nick?
All right. Thanks very much, Rio. And I guess that's some good news there with regard to crashes being down for 2023 compared to 2022. It still feels to me, though, as things are pretty bad out there on the roadways. And certainly with the data I have to cover today, I don't think it's going to be as encouraging as it was when we were wrapping up 2023, and then particularly in early 2023, when we started out in such an encouraging way, with so few fatal crashes. Certainly things have changed. You mentioned also seatbelts. I'll touch on seatbelts when I talk about our data. As always, we're going to do just about three things here. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the memorial and what's going on at the memorial, and particularly since we're coming right into National Police Week. So I'll cover a little bit about that, not too much. So I mentioned adding names, but they just finished last week adding 282 names to the memorial wall, all from what we call pub year, or the group from 2023. 118 of those were from the year of 2023, and then the rest were historic cases. And I would just remind folks that we have a number of cases that get put on from previous years. We have historic cases, and then you have a number of cases that come in during the year that are, gunfire and traffic related, are our two big categories. But we're still putting individuals who suffered from cancers and illnesses related to the events of 9/11 and the rescue recovery efforts. And unfortunately, that still continues to drive names. As always, the Candlelight Vigil is in D.C., so I encourage any of you who are coming to D.C. for Police Week, which will begin May 9th and pretty much go through the 18th. We have several events that are on our website that you can look up on our website under events. I'm going to go over them quickly, though. There's going to be the release of our film. So we have a film called Service and Sacrifice that is exclusive only to the Verizon Theater here in the Memorial and the museum. That's going to be streamed live, or it's going to be streamed so you can watch it. Or I'm not sure the platform yet, but it may be something like a Netflix or a Max or something like that, where you'll be able to see that film. That'll be May 10th. May 11th, there's a K-9 memorial service. May 12th, the Police Unity Tour, which, if you're not familiar with them, they raise a great deal of money, and it's these spokes of bicyclists who ride hundreds of miles to raise money for the memorial and the museum. So they're going to be arriving in D.C. on the 12th. And then May 13th is the Candlelight Vigil. May 14th, there'll be a pipe band parade. May 14th through the 16th, you have the survivors who are all coming to Washington. And the whole program culminates on May 15th with the actual national memorial ceremony that occurs on the west lawn of the Capitol. But it's at the Candlelight Vigil that the names are read, and we have that very, very somber event. Just a reminder for those who may or may not be familiar with our Officer Safety and Wellness group. These are our three main programs that the Memorial Fund runs out of our Officer Safety and Wellness groups, which is the NHTSA program, which is what brings me to you. There's also Destination Zero, which is that award-based National Officer Safety and Wellness Award Program. We had our winners selected this last October in 5 categories. So if you have an excellent program in either developing mental health awareness, or in increasing tactical safety or traffic safety, or have a comprehensive program that is dealing with all of these issues in officer safety and wellness, you should submit that information to Destination Zero. And then Safe Leo, you've heard me mention it. That's suicide awareness for law enforcement officers. A number of us are certified instructors in Safe Leo and travel around the country to help prevent the scourge of suicides in law enforcement. So this is a little bit of whimsy here, because we were in Lifesavers in Denver, and it's funny, Troy and I seem to be getting our pictures taken with the mascots who float through, which was kind of fun. So here's Dinger, who's from the Rockies, and then there's Miles, who's for Mile High Stadium. His name's Miles, and he's the Bronco mascot. on a serious note, our trip to Lifesavers in Denver was an excellent conference. I presented for about an hour and a half on some of the materials that you guys might be used to seeing me covered. I had quite a large audience with a number of excellent questions and points, and I actually learned quite a bit out there in Denver. Lifesavers, if you're not familiar with it, I definitely recommend it. It is a highway safety program conference focused on everything from occupant protection to new techniques and new technology to keep drivers safe on the roadway. Everything from semi-tractor trailers and underride issues to pedestrian issues to what's happening with autonomous vehicles to a criminal justice and enforcement track that I presented on, but also that tracks on what the drug enforcement, marijuana enforcement, the new trend towards oral swabs for detecting drugs, all that is in Lifesavers. So I don't want you to think that my presentation of these mascot photos in any way makes it sort of look silly. That was just one of the kind of funner things that they do every year. And if you remember last year in Seattle, they had the Seahawks mascot there with us. So I guess I feel compelled to get my picture taken with them. I don't know why. Anyway, so let's get into the data for 2023 and 24. Pardon me, I neglected to update those two top dates. I just realized that. But this is where we are for the first quarter of 2024. That's an error there on the top. Should be 23, 24. We have 29 total fatalities in the first quarter, but you see the number we're concerned with, traffic related, is up 100%. And that's, as I was mentioning and talking about what Rio said, and I mentioned that we kind of started off a bad way. This year has started off in a very bad way, as we're standing at double where we were at this time in the first quarter of last year. So the 2024 breakout of crashes is so far, and I'll update the numbers already since we're into April already. We're into the first part of the second quarter. We've had 10 fatal automobile crashes, 3 of which were single vehicles. That's a subcategory that we always look at. And then we had 4 struck by crashes and no motorcycle crashes. And we'll look at each one of those 2 categories, automobile crashes and struck by crashes, a little bit closer. So I normally don't give this early in the year a breakout of agency type. But I did this year because it was, again, our numbers were higher than they were last year during the same period. But I also noticed that there were more sheriffs and state patrol officers in a group in one sort of segment early in the year than normally would occur. Normally, there would be an equal distribution or even more municipal officers represented in that number. So I found it, if nothing more than interesting, that sheriffs and state patrol all of a sudden had sort of a spate of fatal crashes beyond the municipal agencies, which, that includes your townships, your cities, and any large counties. For example, I live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and even though it's a county law enforcement agency, it is essentially a municipal law enforcement agency with its own academy, chief of police, and that whole thing. So normally those represent the highest numbers in our crash numbers. That agency type normally is the highest number. So for the first quarter, when we're looking at automobile crashes, as we look at those 10 crashes, you see 3 involved pursuits. 2 of them involved officers were transporting arrestees when they're in a crash. One of those cases I'll talk about a little bit more. And then 2 were either on an administrative run or going to or from. If you heard the term, we call it coming and going, meaning they had a marked or issued patrol car and they were either coming to or from work or responding in for an assignment. 2 of them were struck while they were parked on the shoulder. One was, I think both had traffic stops. One had a traffic stop for DUI, and I think the other ones had a traffic stop and were standing by their vehicles when a car came through and struck and killed one officer, but injured a couple of officers on the side of the road. And then one crash responding to a call for service. So I expanded this to give everybody a good view of, this is now a 12-year look at the numbers of automobile crashes. that have happened over the last 12 years. And it kind of gives you, the baseline is basically about 25.5% is the average. I think it's 26. But you see, we've gone from a high of 36 in 2015. And last year was the lowest number in those 12 years at 22 automobile crashes. We are already, as you see, we're not halfway through the year, and we already have 10 fatal auto crashes in 2024. So that's not the direction we want to be going in. So I also look at the crash types, and I mean, these are sort of basic facts about the crash. It says it happened at an intersection, or if it was a head-on, or if they lost control. And again, I would remind everybody that this is preliminary data. In none of these cases, even though the first quarter is over, have I reviewed the submitted package that would have a copy of the crash report, the investigation, the CAD, any of the death certificate, that kind of thing. So this is all very preliminary, but essentially 2 occurred at an intersection, 2 involved a head-on crash, 2 were crashes where the officers lost control of their vehicles and went off the roadway. 2 involved, as I mentioned, those 2 vehicles parked on the shoulder. They were rear-ended while parked on the shoulder, and those both, of course, were violations of the slow down and move over provision in those states. 1 was the result of a vehicle rear-ending a stop tractor trailer. And then 1, which is the other single vehicle crash that was a little odd. This deputy drove into a river, and he had an arrestee with him, and the arrestee drowned. And of course, unfortunately, he drowned as well. And that's something that we looked at. I'm calling that a crash, even though the vehicle, I think essentially the initial understanding is that the deputy was unfamiliar with this part of the county he was in, and he was new to the force, and he was driving down a road that he thought was going to lead him to a bridge, and unfortunately it led him right to a boat ramp. And again, there are probably more facts that come out on that case. Very, very tragic case, and because it involved a vehicle, I counted it as a crash. So let's look at the struck by crashes. And you heard me in our last webinar, and I've told you about our report that you can still find on our website regarding the use of tire deflation devices. There's been 1 fatality this year already with an officer struck attempting to deploy a tire deflation device. And if you follow any of the news feeds the way I do every day, there was an officer in Michigan who was struck trying to deploy a tire deflation device. He was not killed. He was seriously injured and unfortunately struck by another police officer. And this is happening all too often as officers are making a last minute or hasty decision to try and deploy the tire deflation device. And I totally understand why they're trying to do it. But it's one of those decisions that we really have to look at closely because the communication piece, I think, is missing and the training may be missing. One of the officers was killed, and this was, again, another sad circumstance. This involved a multi-jurisdictional pursuit from Alabama to Georgia. I think it ended in Alabama, but it was a Georgia officer who, when he was getting out of his car running to arrest the suspect in this chase, who I think had crashed, was struck by another police officer and killed, who was also responding to the scene. That's just another one of these unfortunate things that occur. And really, I mean, I can't imagine having to try and live with that, whether, regardless of the circumstances. 1 was on a crash scene. He was already working a crash scene, and I've talked about this scenario. It's one of our more common scenarios where officers are already in an existing crash scene and somebody comes barreling through, either on their phone or impaired or whatever their issue is, and strikes somebody while they're on the scene of that crash. And then, as I mentioned, one of the struck bys was on a traffic stop. So as we look at struck bys, and as you know, we concentrated heavily on them following 2021 with that huge spike, they have been going down. And last year was a good year. That was the lowest number. And as I mentioned, that was our lowest number of auto crashes as well in 2023 over the last several years. We have 4 for the first quarter this year. And I mentioned that 10 for last year. It's actually, in terms of the struck by crashes that we look at and are interested in getting data from, it's really 9. And I'll just remind you why I say that. There was a case in 2023 an officer was run over by a car, but the car had already come to rest following a crash. That officer had gone to help and opened the passenger door, and the vehicle, for whatever reason, either being taken out of gear or the foot coming off the brake, rolled backwards and trapped that officer as it rolled back down the median. So again, we're calling that a struck by, but it doesn't really count in terms of what we look at traditionally at struck bys. I hope everybody understands what I mean about that. So one of the things that I just completed, and I will share more of this data, and we will be creating more infographics and more quick info cards and things that people can post in their various precincts and jurisdictions. This is a 10-year look of what was happening when officers were struck and killed from 2014 to 2023. And I would simply say, just look at your right-hand side of the pie, 12%, 21%, and 17%. If we can continue to focus on those areas, that being deploying a tire deflation device, exercising more caution and working better with blocking vehicles and employing Tim's principles at crash scenes, and then on traffic enforcement, making sure we are on the right side, passenger side of that vehicle, or taking that stop to a safer location, or doing small things. And we've had a little bit of disagreement about the idea of canting your vehicle wheels. We saw in the video of Connor Boyle how that actually protected him, but others came up to me after we presented that and said they believed it was safer. And I know I'm probably in a thumbnail, but to just simply offset rather than cant the vehicle wheels, I'm not sure. Seems to me if you cant your wheels, that'll push the car away from you and the vehicle you have stopped. It might push it out into traffic, but better than it being pushed right into the back of you, the person you stopped in their car. Again, that's something that we can probably discuss. But looking at this, it'll tell you almost every single circumstance in which an officer was struck and killed over the last 10 years. And of course, the big three are what I think we should be looking at. So you'll hear me talk about those. In that data, we went through what the Memorial Fund had. And I say that only because if you look at these numbers, the 27, the 5, and the 26, they're asterisks next to them. Out of all those crash numbers for 10 years, to say 27 were confirmed impaired, we know that number's low. That's we aren't always able to get the final analysis as to impairment or not. A lot of times it's available preliminarily, and then a lot of times it's noted in the investigative information we get. But it's really only in the last 3 to 4 years that we've been going through that information at the end of the year to comb through it and get that data. The Memorial Fund research team has far too many cases coming in for them to do more than a basic look at the crash and get the basic information than to try and go back and read or research whether or not that individual is charged with DUI. I go and do that now, and I've been doing that for the last 3 years. So I say all that to say those numbers, 5 being distracted, we know the numbers are much higher. 26 involved in violation of slow down and move over. I can go back and reconcile that. Again, those numbers, I believe, are underreported. All I'm telling you is that these are the numbers we have confirmed, that I can come back and show you that case and say, yep, they're on a highway. It was marked. The officer's lights were on. They were on the shoulder, and the vehicle failed to slow down and move over and struck that individual or crashed into that car. Others, we have to do a little bit more research on the location and that state law. And we will have a Q&A at the end of this. Please, if you have questions, put them into the chat now. I should have mentioned that earlier, and we'll do our best to answer them at the end. I always put this up here to remind everybody that respondersafety.com has the struck by reporting program. So near miss, injury, property damage, the things that you know are probably not being captured, please take the time if you're on the scene of one. And if you're a towing and recovery person, a DOT person, a fire department person, EMS or police officer, and you're there on the scene and you have a near miss, or your truck was sideswiped, or you were injured, or somebody was injured, or there was a crash but no injuries, we need to make sure we grab that data. As you've heard me say many times, we can't do anything about the problem if we can't get our arms around it. So for NHTSA, I'm always putting the crashes into their regions. Region 4 and 6, as you probably know, are hot regions in terms of having the highest number of fatal law enforcement crashes. Texas has suffered a couple already this year in near Houston, in Harris County. But unfortunately, Georgia in Region 4 has already had 4 fatal law enforcement crashes. And that's a high number for one state early on in one year. And again, you know, as I look at these things, I'm always wondering, you know, is there some way to figure out the pattern of how these things are occurring or where they're going to occur? And, you know, the answer is ultimately no. But I'm always looking and trying to figure out what it is that could be precipitating a spate of these crashes when early on last year we had none. We went through all of January without a single fatal. Meanwhile, here we are, twice that number in the first quarter in 2024, and you have to ask yourself why. You know, so I do, and the answer could be that's just life, and those are the factors you can't control. But even so, I always try and look at it. So we talk about fatalities, but one of the things I've been doing over the last few years is also cutting and pasting any news reports of injuries from across the country. I have a couple of different search methods from not only Google Docs, but through the websites that I routinely check every day, and basic open source searches. And already in 2024, the number of cases that I found and put into that document, I'm over twice where I were at this point that year. So we're already that far ahead this year. And I'm almost positive that it has nothing to do with my inability to identify these cases. It has everything to do with more crashes occurring. And these images, as you see there, one came from Michigan, one came from Ventura County Sheriffs, and the one at the bottom is from Ohio. In my understanding, those officers were injured, some of them severely, but the injuries take a huge toll on our agencies as well. And those of you who are in law enforcement know how difficult it can be to come back from a crash or a severe injury, and, you know, not only get your physical body right, but get your mind right to get back out on the road and do the job. And that's why when we do our videos, we feature stories of success of officers who've been in crashes. They share their story with you to say, here's what I did, here's what I do differently. But almost, I think all of them, they all are back to duty. And the point being is that, you know, they got back on the horse, they survived, and hopefully you can learn from their lesson. But we don't want to overlook the injuries. So as we talk about current events and what's going on, there have been 3 newspapers that have focused and done either long articles or entire series on new data coming out on police crashes, particularly in New York State. The Albany Times-Union did a expose on the increased number of crashes involving law enforcement and the side effects of those crashes where officers have killed people in pursuits. There have been more at-fault crashes involving law enforcement. The articles take a little bit of a bend on, you know, you've got officers who are responsible for some of these horrific crashes who are not held to account. Others are highlighting the fact that some of these officers had multiple crashes and had not been through retraining or a recertification of any type like that. So, and the reason I'm mentioning these, one, I want you to go and if you can read them, but the Albany Times-Union reporter is going to be the guest in our next quarter webinar. I've invited her to come and talk about the data she found, what she did find about it. This is in no means an adversarial process. This is us learning about what the reporter found so we can address it. And the final article in the Albany Times-Union series was about how New York State is already looking at retraining and additional training so they can cut down on these crashes. And I would doubt that New York State is the only state that's experiencing this increase in at-fault crashes involving law enforcement officers. And this all comes at a time when some agencies have relaxed their pursuit policies. And if any of you follow Gordon Graham and listen to his tips on Lexapol at Police One, And I sent him an email the other day about this. He had done a quick Lexipol tip about pursuits. And in his quick tip, he was quite exasperated, and he himself called it a rant. I mean, he says, I don't mean to rant, but, you know, I've been up in front of you people for I don't know how long talking about this. And he was speaking specifically about pursuits, and specifically about pursuits over minor things. Someone fled a traffic stop, and now we end up killing somebody else or the person because they fled and we're chasing them. And, you know, he's talked about more informed policies, and he's talked about the risks involved in pursuits, and they're dangerous. And somewhere in there, we've got to have better strategies in some of these pursuits, and making sure that we're not putting lives at risk over something that's minor. So we have to weigh the risk, same as what we've been preaching about the use of tire deflation devices. So I mentioned I would bring us up to date to where we are now. So I check the numbers every day. That's part of my job, and I add them to my spreadsheet as I investigate the report of a fatal crash. We actually now have 20 fatal crashes. 15 are auto collisions, 5 are single vehicle, and there are 5 struck by crashes. Again, no motorcycle crashes. So the numbers are still significantly higher in this first 4 months now of 2024 than they were in 2023. So we're going in the wrong direction, and we need to figure it out. One of the other things we noticed, and you've probably heard me talk about this before, but this also leads to pursuits. I don't know of any agency that's going to let somebody drive away in their police car and not chase them. And so here are just a few of the reports of stolen police vehicles. One occurred in Massachusetts following the fatal crash when an officer was struck and killed. They chased that suspect. He got into one of the police vehicles. I guess somebody got out to apprehend him, and he circled back around and jumped in it and took off. There was the case of a handcuffed suspect in Colorado who slipped the cuffs up over the front of his, you know, around his feet and over his legs, and was able to dive through the little window and took off. And they chased that individual, and he ended up crashing, and I think ended up dying in that crash. At one point in Michigan, an uninvolved third party came up and took a vehicle that was running while an individual was conducting a traffic stop. There was a hit and run in Maryland here, and actually I said police vehicle, but this was actually a highway vehicle that was stolen, and of course led to a big, long pursuit through a number of locations in Maryland where vehicles were rammed, state police vehicles were rammed, and they eventually brought this guy under control and got him arrested, but not before he tore up a lot of things. And then another one where a suspect was being questioned, and that happened in California. Someone jumped into a running police car and took off. So it would just behoove us to think about that, to maybe have officers think about it, and maybe there's some different things we can do. I know it's probably an issue of battery power and leaving your emergency equipment on, and your lights running, and or, you know, making sure that the fan is on for the canine, whatever it is, but we've got to figure out some way of securing our vehicles. So this is one of the things we've been looking at. I know there is a jurisdiction, there's a jurisdiction in Texas that is having a problem with this. And I'm told the chief has authorized his officers to, if all else fails, if they can't get them to stop, and I know some have tried to run up alongside them and pit them, and others have, of course, tried to put them lights and sirens on in front of them to get them to stop. If you watch a lot of these videos, the people do everything they can to drive around them, or they drive right into them. But this chief, I understand, has authorized his officers to then ram their vehicles. I think that's very noble. I think we have to find a better solution. There was an officer killed 2 years ago who intercepted a wrong-way driver, and he did so heroically, but he ended up dying in that crash. So we've got to come up with better solutions than ramming the suspect vehicle, although I understand at the end of the day, you got to stop that car. One of the things as I began to look into it that I discovered was virtually 80% of all these wrong-way drivers are drunk. They're impaired. And the other 20 or so percent are elderly. And in almost all those cases, they were alone in the car, meaning they didn't have that second person there to either tell them they went the wrong way on the ramp or to caution them or to try and sort of get their mind right about what is happening. So if any of you have any wrong way crashes you want to share or know of stories where I've been covering quite a few, but if you have any stories that could be highlighted, please send them to me. We are just kind of compiling a list, and it may be something we'd like to take a bigger dive into, although it looks like some folks are already looking at this problem through highway engineering, signage, that kind of thing. The core concerns haven't really changed, as we ask what's going on behind the wheel, complacency and fatigue are big issues, I think. We've emphasized additional training. I've talked about TDDs. Body armor is something that I also track, whether or not they had it on when they were in their crash or in their struck by crash. Seat belts, as I did that reexamination of 10 years of data, the number is still the same. Close to 50% of the officers involved in fatal crashes are not wearing their seatbelt. And that brings me up to something that came out when we were in Denver at Lifesavers. Two people in the audience, as we were having a discussion in there, I was taking questions, mentioned to me that there are two states, and I'm not 100% sure, but I think they said Missouri and Kansas, that if you're a law enforcement officer or a public safety officer and are involved in a crash and killed, but you're not wearing your seatbelt, you only get half of your benefits from the state because it's a state law that all public employees wear their seatbelt. So I thought that was I'd never heard of that before, and I kind of had mixed feelings about it. But certainly that's one way to motivate people to at least think even more about their own safety and then their family's ultimate safety. If they were to know that, hey, if I don't have this on and something wild happens to me, even if it's not my own fault, I could lose 50% of the state benefit that I'm owed if I am killed in the line of duty. And I'm assuming that also goes for any compensation workers' comp claim. So I thought that was an interesting fact that I had not heard. So there is an upcoming conference in DC. It's an IACP Impaired Driving and Traffic Safety Conference. I think if you haven't heard of it or aren't aware of it, you might want to look it up. There could be some interesting things there. We are probably just going to go as, when I say we, myself, I'll go as a participant. And we are going to be at the National Sheriff's Association in Oklahoma City in June. So we'll have a booth there, possibly a presentation, but be sharing all of our data and information with the Sheriff's Association group out there in Oklahoma City. We'll be working on doing more flash drives here soon, updated with everything. And as always, we try and get those ready by IACP, which is in the fall. That's kind of the big dance for a lot of our stuff. But we want to keep developing these things so they're almost evergreen. We constantly update them, and when you get one, there's worthwhile information on there. There are no secrets here. This is all your data. These are, and it's not a joke, these are your tax dollars at work supporting this research so we can enact change. That's what it's all about. And I certainly felt Gordon Graham's passion as he was exasperated talking about some of the issues that, we've been saying this for a long time, and in some ways it doesn't seem like the message is getting through. I was very hopeful in 2023, and I remain hopeful, but we clearly have work we have to continue to do. So, well, I want to thank everybody. I want to thank Rio. As always, please contact me. And if you have someone who you think would be a good guest or has something to share, even if it's something outside the box, like a new technology, whatever it may be, I definitely like to hear about it. We're always looking to bring you guys a different informative guest. And I think talking to the reporter, that'll be in July in our second quarter. I think that'll be fascinating to hear from, her name's Emily, to hear about the data she gathered, the analysis, and what she found. So thank you, everybody. Everybody stay safe, and I'll see you next time.
Please subscribe to Precinct 444 on your favorite podcasting platform to stay connected and to receive our latest content as soon as it drops. We would love to hear from you. Send in your questions, comments, and feedback to precinct444@nleomf.org. You can help us make our content even better. The National Law Enforcement Museum is located at 444 East Street Northwest in Washington, D.C., and is dedicated to telling the story of American law enforcement. We expand and enrich the relationship between law enforcement and the community through educational journeys, immersive exhibitions, and insightful programs. Find us online at lawenforcementmuseum.org and stay tuned for more podcast content from Precinct 444. Until next time, stay safe. We'll see you at the precinct.